What would drive one of the most powerful men in history to abandon the great city of Rome and retreat to a remote island in the sea? Why did Emperor Tiberius, the ruler of the mighty Roman Empire, choose exile over glory? And what exactly happened on that island that made his name echo through history as one of the darkest and most scandalous emperors the world has ever known? Tiberius was no ordinary man. Adopted by Augustus, Rome's first emperor, he inherited an empire at the height of its power. He commanded armies, ruled over millions, and had at his disposal the wealth of the known world. But despite his immense authority, Tiberius was a man haunted by politics, by betrayal, and by the crushing weight of expectations. In his early years as emperor, he was competent, even respected. He ensured the empire's borders were secure, managed finances carefully, and avoided reckless wars. But as time passed, something inside him changed. The pressures of ruling Rome, the endless scheming of the Senate, and the whispers of rivals wore him down. The city that had once praised him became, in his eyes, a nest of serpents. And so, in a shocking move, Tiberius withdrew. He left the capital behind and sailed to the rocky island of Capri, a place both breathtakingly beautiful and terrifyingly isolated. The island rose like a fortress from the sea, its cliffs dropping steeply into dark waters. At its highest point, he built the Villa Jovis, a palace fortress that would become both his sanctuary and his prison. To the outside world, Capri was paradise. Clear waters, secret grottos, marble halls, and terraces overlooking the endless horizon. But for those who lived there with the emperor, it was something else entirely. Behind the gleaming marble walls, a shadow fell over the court of Tiberius. Soon, stories began to spread. Servants whispered of strange rituals. Courtiers spoke of lavish feasts that blurred the line between luxury and excess. And senators in Rome painted pictures of an emperor who had abandoned all decency. The Villa Jovis became legendary, not for its beauty, but for the rumors of what took place within. Tiberius himself rarely returned to Rome after settling on Capri. He governed from afar, sending orders and letters, while surrounding himself with a carefully chosen circle of attendants. Some believed he was simply retreating from politics. Others claimed he was indulging in darker pleasures that could not be spoken of openly. And this is where the myth of the monster of Capri was born. Ancient historians like Suetonius and Tacitus filled their pages with lurid tales, describing Tiberius as a man consumed by paranoia and corruption. But the truth is far more complicated. Were these accounts accurate reflections of his reign, or were they carefully crafted attacks by enemies eager to tarnish his memory? Regardless of what really happened, one fact is undeniable. Tiberius transformed the island of Capri into the most infamous retreat in Roman history. The world still remembers him not for his laws or victories, but for the dark aura of secrecy that surrounded his final years. And so, the story begins, with an emperor who turned away from the glory of Rome and vanished into the shadows of an island paradise. What awaited his guests and servants behind those stone walls? That is where the legend truly takes hold. From the moment Tiberius set foot on Capri, the island itself became as much a character in his story as the emperor himself. Rising like a jagged crown from the Tyrrhenian Sea, Capri was beautiful, remote, and dangerous. Its cliffs plunged sharply into the waters below, leaving only narrow paths and hidden coves for access. To most Romans, it was a place too isolated, too harsh, too far removed from the bustle of the empire. To Tiberius, it was perfect. At the summit of the island stood the Villa Jovis, the Villa of Jupiter, a sprawling palace fortress that dominated the landscape, built of marble and stone. With terraces overlooking the sea, it combined the majesty of Rome with the inaccessibility of a mountain stronghold. From here, Tiberius could gaze out over the endless horizon, watching for ships approaching from the mainland. He could control who entered and who left, a king ruling over his own private domain. But the fortress was not only about power, it was about isolation. The emperor had removed himself from Rome, from the Senate, from the endless tide of petitions and politics. Those who came to Capri entered a world entirely shaped by Tiberius. The courtyards, the baths, the dining halls. Every corner carried an atmosphere of tension, as though unseen eyes were always watching. Servants whispered that the palace had secret passages, hidden stairways, and private chambers where the emperor could appear without warning. Guests never knew whether they were truly alone. The marble halls echoed with footsteps, the grottos resonated with the crash of waves, and the very air seemed heavy with secrecy. In Rome, the stories began to grow darker. Senators claimed that Tiberius had turned Capri into a private kingdom of fear and excess. They painted him as a recluse who surrounded himself with flatterers and sycophants, indulging in pleasures while neglecting the duties of state. To them, the emperor was no longer the stern general who once commanded legions but a shadow of a man lost in his own obsessions. But for those who lived on the island with him, Capri was more than rumor. It was a place where loyalty was tested daily. Careless word could be fatal. Visitors tread carefully, unsure of what the emperor might think, unsure if they were truly honored guests or prisoners of his will. The cliffs themselves seemed to warn intruders. Once you entered the world of Tiberius, escape was nearly impossible. The Villa Jovis was decorated with splendor, but its beauty masked an oppressive atmosphere. Marble statues stared silently from alcoves, golden mosaics glimmered in torchlight, and the scent of incense filled the air. Yet behind the grandeur lay unease. Tiberius was known for his silence, for watching his courtiers with cold, calculating eyes. Few dared to speak unless spoken to, and fewer still felt secure in his presence. Even the natural beauty of Capri carried a sense of menace. The famous Blue Grotto, with its glowing azure waters, was whispered to be a place of strange ceremonies. The cliffs where the sea thundered against the rock were rumored to have witnessed scenes that could never be spoken aloud. To outsiders, these were mere tales, but to those who served on Capri, the line between myth and reality blurred dangerously. And as Tiberius grew older, the island seemed to reflect his transformation. What had once been a retreat became a prison of his own making. His mistrust of Rome deepened, and with it, his reliance on Capri as both shield and cage. To some, he was a tragic figure, a ruler crushed by suspicion and isolation. To others, he was the very embodiment of tyranny, cloaking cruelty in the silence of stone walls. Capri, in the time of Tiberius, was not simply an island. It was a mirror of power pushed to its extremes, beautiful yet terrifying, majestic yet suffocating. And at the heart of it all stood an emperor whose every move fed the growing legend of his darkness. As Tiberius secluded himself on Capri, far from the politics of Rome, the silence he left behind was filled with whispers. And whispers, in the heart of the empire, often grew into storms. Senators, generals, and writers who despised him began to craft stories. Tales that painted the emperor not as a ruler, but as a monster. The most famous among them was Suetonius, the biographer of emperors. Writing years later, he described Tiberius's time on Capri in lurid detail. According to Suetonius, the island was transformed into a labyrinth of unspeakable pleasures, where the emperor surrendered to every dark impulse. He claimed that Tiberius filled his palace with entertainers, companions, and courtiers who indulged his every whim. The walls of Villa Jovis, Suetonius suggested, witnessed acts too shameful for the civilized world. Another historian, Tacitus, though more restrained, also hinted at the corruption of Capri. He wrote of executions ordered from the island, of noble families destroyed by imperial suspicion, of a ruler whose paranoia turned deadly. Tacitus's words carried a different kind of weight, less scandalous than Suetonius, but just as damning. Together, their accounts built a picture of an emperor whose retreat became synonymous with excess and cruelty. The Senate in Rome, many of whom despised Tiberius for ignoring their authority, added fuel to the fire. They spread rumors of grotesque spectacles, of rituals in the Blue Grotto, of secret feasts where morality was cast aside. These stories spread through the empire like wildfire, traveling from taverns to marketplaces, whispered with both fear and fascination. But the question remained, how much of this was true? Tiberius was a complex man, both disciplined and reclusive, both calculating and suspicious. His decision to rule from Capri angered the elite in Rome, who saw it as abandonment. To them, he was a coward hiding from responsibility. And in their resentment, every gesture, every rumor, every shadow became proof of his corruption. Some modern historians argue that Suetonius and Tacitus exaggerated deliberately. By portraying Tiberius as depraved, they served the agenda of later rulers who wanted to distance themselves from his legacy. Others suggest that the truth was somewhere in between, that Capri did become a place of indulgence, but that the scale of the stories was blown far out of proportion. Yet to the people of Rome, perception was reality. And the perception of Tiberius was that of a man who had lost all restraint. The isolation of Capri was turned against him. Without the emperor in the city to defend himself, the legends grew unchecked. Each year added new layers of scandal, until Tiberius became less a man and more a cautionary tale of absolute power gone astray. Imagine the ordinary Roman hearing these tales in a marketplace. Stories of marble halls filled with strange entertainments, of secret chambers lit only by torchlight, of an emperor who had traded duty for obsession. Whether true or false, the effect was the same: fear, fascination, and disgust. And so Capri, an island of natural beauty, became infamous as a stage for shadows. The name of Tiberius, once celebrated as a successful general, was now whispered with a mixture of awe and horror. To his enemies, the isolation of the emperor was proof of guilt. To his supporters, it was the tragic retreat of a man who could no longer trust those around him. But for history, the result was clear. The image of Tiberius was forever stained. The legends of his time on Capri would outlive him, echoing across centuries, shaping how posterity would remember not only the man but the very meaning of imperial corruption. If Capri was paradise to the eye, to those who lived under Tiberius it was a gilded prison. The Villa Jovis loomed like a watchtower over the sea, and within its marble halls every shadow carried danger. For the emperor, mistrust was a way of life, and fear became the instrument through which he ruled both the island and the empire beyond. Visitors to Capri quickly learned the rules. Speak cautiously, never question the emperor, and remember that even the walls might be listening. Servants were dismissed or worse for the slightest mistakes. Courtiers whispered that Tiberius could sense deceit in a man's eyes, and those who dared to cross him often vanished without explanation. The cliffs of Capri themselves became symbols of his authority. Ancient writers claimed that those who displeased Tiberius were hurled into the sea below, their cries drowned by the waves. Whether this was truth or rumor mattered little. The fear was real. To walk the marble terraces was to feel the weight of the emperor's silent gaze, to know that one misstep could mean the end. Meanwhile, in Rome, the machinery of fear extended its reach. Tiberius empowered a network of informers, men who thrived on suspicion and betrayal. They prowled the city, listening for any whisper of disloyalty, ready to accuse senators and citizens alike. Trials for treason multiplied, and punishments were swift and severe. The empire trembled, not because the emperor was present, but because his shadow stretched from Capri all the way to the Forum. Within the palace, the atmosphere was suffocating. Banquets were quiet affairs where laughter was cautious and conversation rehearsed. The emperor himself often sat in silence, his piercing eyes scanning the faces of those around him. Every guest wondered, was I invited to honor or to test my loyalty? The uncertainty gnawed at even the most powerful men. Rumors claimed that Tiberius spent long nights wandering his halls, restless and suspicious, haunted by the thought of betrayal. Others said he retreated to the island's grottos, where the crashing waves echoed like the voices of his own paranoia. Capri, once a refuge from the noise of Rome, had become an echo chamber for his darkest fears. And yet, despite the isolation, Tiberius remained firmly in control of the empire. Letters bearing his seal left Capri regularly, carrying orders that could decide the fate of armies and senators alike. His distance from Rome only increased the sense of mystery. To the Senate, he was both absent and omnipresent. Unseen in the city, yet more terrifying than if he had been seated in their chambers. The fear was not only political, it was personal. Senators whispered that Tiberius no longer trusted anyone, not even his own family. The death of his son Drusus years earlier had deepened his suspicion, and those close to him found themselves under constant watch. Even allies were discarded if they showed the slightest hint of ambition. For the people of Rome, the emperor's retreat became a story told with dread. Parents frightened children with tales of Capri's cliffs, of the emperor who lived above the sea in a palace where no laughter was genuine and no loyalty secure. Merchants avoided speaking his name too loudly, as if even in Rome his ears could hear them. Whether all of these fears were justified or exaggerated hardly mattered. Fear itself was the tool of empire, and Tiberius wielded it with masterful precision. Capri was not just an island. It was the throne of a ruler who had discovered that terror could bind men more tightly than love or admiration. And so the legend of the emperor deepened. A man who ruled an empire not through presence, but through absence. Not through honor, but through dread. The Villa Jovis stood not only as his palace, but as a monument to fear itself. By the time Tiberius had settled permanently on Capri, the emperor had perfected a new kind of rule, one that required neither his presence in Rome nor his voice in the Senate. Instead, his greatest weapon became fear itself, carried across the empire like an invisible legion. From his marble fortress, Tiberius issued orders through carefully written letters. These documents, sealed with imperial authority, arrived in Rome like thunderbolts. A senator could wake in the morning a man of power, and by nightfall find himself accused of treason, his fortune confiscated, his life in ruins. The emperor did not need to stand in the forum. His words alone were enough to unmake destinies. The system of delators, informers, flourished under his reign. These men thrived on suspicion, filing accusations against anyone whose loyalty appeared questionable. For them, betrayal was profitable. Wealth, titles, and imperial favor awaited those who uncovered plots, whether real or imagined. And so Rome became a city of whispers, where every conversation might hide a dagger, and every friendship might mask a spy. In this environment, Tiberius's absence became more frightening than his presence. He was not seen, and for that very reason he was everywhere. Senators debated with trembling hands, never knowing whether the emperor was reading their words from Capri. Families grew wary of their own kin, for even a careless jest could be twisted into treason. The fear was sharpened by public trials. When the accused were dragged before the Senate, their downfall was not only a punishment but a warning. Their property was seized, their names blackened, and their families disgraced. Each trial reinforced the message. The emperor might be far away, but his reach was infinite. Meanwhile, Capri itself grew into a symbol of imperial distance. To some, it was a paradise where the emperor lived like a god above the sea. To others, it was a cursed island, a place where men vanished and rumors multiplied. The more isolated Tiberius became, the greater his legend grew. He was no longer seen as a man, but as a shadowy force directing the fate of Rome from behind the cliffs of Capri. And this transformation had consequences. Rome's political class, once confident in its own importance, now found itself diminished. The Senate became an echo chamber, repeating the emperor's decrees rather than debating policy. Even the most powerful aristocrats learned that survival depended not on merit but on silence, submission, and careful obedience. For ordinary Romans, the stories that drifted across the sea blurred fact and fiction. Some believed Capri was filled with endless luxury. Others claimed it was haunted by unspeakable practices. Both images inspired fear, one of indulgence without limits, the other of cruelty without mercy. In truth, no one could know for certain, and that uncertainty itself was power. Tiberius had discovered a truth that rulers across history would envy. He did not need love to rule, nor constant displays of strength. Fear was enough. A letter, a rumor, or a single glance could hold more weight than armies. Capri was his throne not because of its beauty, but because from its isolation he could control the beating heart of Rome with nothing more than silence. As the years passed, the emperor grew older, more reclusive, and more mysterious. Yet his grip on power never wavered. And when his name was spoken in Rome, It was with the hushed tone reserved not for rulers, but for curses. Tiberius, the soldier once known for discipline, had become something else entirely. The Emperor of Shadows, the Master of Fear. And in that transformation, his legacy was sealed. By the final years of his reign, Tiberius was no longer the man who had once marched with legions or commanded respect as Rome's stern general. On Capri, isolated from the city he despised, he had become a figure of myth. To some, he was a prisoner of his own fears. To others, he was the very embodiment of tyranny, ruling not with armies or charisma but with silence and suspicion. The emperor grew old within the walls of Villa Jovis. The once vigorous soldier was now frail, his body worn by years of rule and his mind weighed down by paranoia. Reports from Rome grew ever darker. Senators accused of treason, families ruined, executions carried out in his name. Whether or not Tiberius personally ordered each case mattered little. His reputation was sealed as the architect of terror. And then came his death in 37 AD. According to ancient sources, it was a moment as mysterious and dramatic as his life on Capri. Some claimed he died quietly in his bed. Others whispered that his successor, Caligula, and allies smothered him to hasten their rise. Whatever the truth, the emperor's passing marked the end of an era and the beginning of a legend. When the news reached Rome, the city erupted in celebration. Crowds poured into the streets, rejoicing at the death of the man they called a tyrant. For many, his death was liberation, a chance to breathe freely after years of fear. The Senate, long humiliated by his absence and his dominance, wasted no time in condemning his memory. Statues of Tiberius were toppled, his name cursed, his reign remembered only in whispers of cruelty. But history is never simple. In the centuries that followed, scholars debated the truth of Tiberius's life on Capri. Was he truly the monster Suetonius described, or a victim of slander, destroyed by enemies who found it convenient to turn him into a symbol of corruption? Modern historians point out that his administration, despite the scandals, was efficient and stable. He kept the empire's finances secure, avoided reckless wars, and left Rome stronger than when he found it. Yet facts could not undo the legends. For the ordinary people, the image of Tiberius was fixed. The emperor who abandoned Rome for a cliffside palace of shadows, whose every silence bred fear, whose every decision reminded the empire of the cost of absolute power. Capri became forever linked to his name, a place not of beauty but of infamy. The story of Tiberius is not only about one man, but about the way power distorts memory. His enemies painted him as depraved. His supporters saw him as cautious and misunderstood. But in the end, it was the darker version that survived, because it was the version that captured the imagination. Tales of excess, cruelty, and paranoia outlived the truth, shaping how generations remembered him. And so, when we think of Tiberius today, we do not see the capable general or the cautious administrator. We see the monster of Capri, a ruler who hid from Rome, ruled through fear, and left behind a legacy of darkness. Perhaps the real Tiberius lies somewhere between the extremes, not the saint his defenders described, nor the beast his enemies portrayed. But history rarely remembers balance. It remembers shadows, whispers, and scandal. Capri still stands, its cliffs rising above the sea, its ruins echoing with the silence of the man who once ruled there. And every wave that crashes against those rocks seems to carry the same chilling question. What truly happened on the island of Tiberius?